He calls us not only to be hearers, but also to be doers, turning spiritual principles into concrete actions in daily life. When we learn and apply these teachings, we are not only looking for a deeper relationship with God, but also for a full and happy life. The teachings of Jesus are a guiding light, helping us overcome challenges and live according to our dignity and calling. Overwhelming sense of presence. Feeling God's presence in daily life is one of the most profound and direct signs of divine visitation. According to God's teachings, His presence does not necessarily have to be manifested through great miracles, such as burning bushes or opening the sea. Instead, He often comes to us through gentle but meaningful moments in daily life. These experiences can be times when we feel a sense of peace, immense love, or comfort in moments of suffering, proving that God is always present and cares about every detail of life. Live us. God's presence is often felt through deeply personal experiences. For example, when a person is facing the pain of loss or loneliness, there may be a sense of comfort and peace that comes from an inexplicable source. This is not just a temporary feeling of peace, but a real spiritual visitation, making us feel as if an invisible hand is supporting and protecting us. These moments not only ease the pain, but also deepen our faith in God's care and love. God's teachings in the Bible also affirm that He is present in the simple moments of life, like when we feel peace in the midst of a storm or optimism when everything seems hopeless. These experiences are not coincidences, but are ways in which God manifests His presence in our lives. Sometimes, this presence is expressed through the care of those around us, through helpful advice from a friend, or even encouragement from a stranger. These things not only make us feel loved, but also strengthen our faith in God's constant presence in every aspect of our lives. God has said that He will never abandon us. Deuteronomy 31:6. His presence in our lives is not something foreign, but an essential part of daily life. Those moments when we feel comfort, peace, and deep love are God's presence being made manifest. These are clear signs of divine visitation, helping us realize that even in the most difficult times, God is always present, ready to support and guide us. Unexpected resolution to problems. Prayer is an essential means in the spiritual life of believers, according to God's teachings. For many people, prayer is not only a religious ritual but also a way to communicate directly with God, express a deep connection with Him, and seek guidance in daily life. According to God's teachings, prayer is not only about expressing one's own needs and wishes, but also an opportunity to listen and receive guidance from Him. God's teachings in the Bible emphasize that prayer is an act of faith and dependence on Him. In Matthew 6:6, Jesus teaches that prayer should be done in silence and privacy, not to show off to others, but to meet God in sincerity and privacy. Not only does this help the believer focus on his personal relationship with God, but it also opens the door to receiving guidance and comfort from Him. Prayer is also a means of seeking wisdom and guidance from God in life's decisions and situations. When we face difficult choices or unforeseen challenges, prayer can help us find the direction and clarity we need. James 1:5 says, "If any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask of the Lord, who gives to all liberally and without reproach, and it will be given to him." This is a strong affirmation that God is ready to give us wisdom when we sincerely ask Him. In addition, prayer is not only to ask for favors, but also a way to express gratitude and glorify God. In times of success, or when receiving favors from Him, prayer helps us not forget to honor and thank God for the good things in life. This not only strengthens our relationship with God, but also helps us maintain a humble and grateful heart. Finally, Prayer also plays an important role in building community and creating connections between believers. When praying together, the community of believers not only shares concerns and aspirations, but also creates an environment of mutual support and encouragement in faith. This is an indispensable part of the spiritual life of those who believe in God. Encounters with strangers. In everyday life, we often encounter times when we feel lost, confused, or in need of specific advice. In these times, meeting a stranger and receiving the right messages or encouragement can be a clear sign of God's presence in our lives. According to God's teachings, these encounters are not random, but His way of sending comfort and guidance to us through unexpected channels. The Bible shows that God often uses strangers to communicate His message. For example, in the book of Acts, we see times when believers were led by unexpected encounters with unknown characters whom God sent to help or provide important instructions. In such a situation, strangers are not simply random individuals, but are actually tools that God uses to accomplish His purposes. These encounters often occur when we are looking for support or in need of specific advice. They can come in the form of a chance conversation, a word of encouragement, or a shared story from someone you've never met before. When faced with difficult decisions, or when feeling overwhelmed, these meetings can give us the answers, encouragement, or insight we need. God's teachings in the Bible show us that He is the one who cares about every detail of our lives. He is present not only in great events but also in small and everyday moments. Meeting a stranger with precise advice at a critical moment is one way God shows His care and presence. This helps us realize that we are never truly alone. God is always present and at work in our lives, even through channels we least expect. A memorable example is the story of Emma, who felt confused when deciding whether to move abroad for a new job opportunity. While she was pondering, she met a stranger in the park who shared his own story about moving to a new place and the benefits it brought. This stranger's story not only resonated with Emma's concerns, but also gave her the encouragement she needed to make an important decision. Emma clearly felt that this was a sign from God, a confirmation that He was leading and supporting her through this encounter. Encounters with strangers can be clear signs of God's presence in our lives. They remind us that, even though we may feel lonely or don't know where to go, God always has a way to reach out and provide the guidance we need through people we least expect. Best. Dreams and visions. According to God's teachings, love and kindness are core principles that every believer needs to practice in daily life. Jesus taught that love is not just an emotion, but also a concrete action toward those around us, especially those that society often ignores or forgets. In the Bible, loving is a duty, not only toward family and friends, but also toward strangers, enemies, and all those in need. One of Jesus' outstanding teachings is love your enemies. Matthew 5:44. This is a powerful and challenging calling, asking us not only to love our loved ones, but also those who have harmed us or hurt us. Loving our enemies does not mean that we have to accept their bad behavior, but that we need to approach them with compassion, forgiveness, and a willingness to build a peaceful relationship. This is a profound expression of the love God desires us to show, even in the most difficult and heartbreaking of circumstances. In the book of Luke, Jesus tells the parable of the Good Samaritan, Luke 10:25-37, to illustrate love without discrimination. In this story, a Samaritan, despised by the Jewish community, helps an injured Jew, even though the Jew has been abandoned by others. This parable shows that love must be exercised not only within our own family or community, but must also extend outside, to everyone we can help, regardless of their ethnicity, about any social group. Jesus taught that love also includes serving others and being willing to sacrifice for them. In the book of John, he said, "The greatest among you will be your servant." John 13:14-15. This is a reminder that greatness is not measured by power or status, but by service and helping others. These acts of service may include caring for the weak, helping the needy, and acting for the benefit of the community. Love and kindness were not only what Jesus taught, but also the principles that he lived and practiced in his life. When we follow this teaching, we not only demonstrate God's love for us, but we also contribute to building a better world, where love and care trump discrimination, distinction, and hatred. Love the way God teaches is an ongoing journey, loving every day, treating everyone we meet with fairness and kindness, and always seeking to make the world around us a better place. Should be better. Revival of lost hope. One of the outstanding teachings on forgiveness comes from the Sermon on the Mount, where Jesus taught, "If you forgive others their trespasses, your Father in heaven will also forgive you your trespasses. But if you do not forgive others their trespasses, your Father will not forgive your trespasses." Matthew 6:14-15. This shows that forgiveness is not just an action, but an essential element in a relationship with God. Forgiving others is how we show sensitivity and humility to the unconditional forgiveness that God has for us. Jesus also gave the parable of the prodigal son, Luke 15:11-32, to illustrate the forgiveness of Father God. In this story, a son claimed his share of the inheritance, went away, and lived wastefully. When he returned, even though he had caused great pain to the family, his father still received him with compassion and forgiveness, not only accepting him back, but also organizing a big party to welcome him. This parable not only emphasizes forgiveness, but also shows that no matter how big our mistakes are, God is always ready to open his arms to welcome us back. Forgiveness is not only about resolving personal conflicts, but is also an important part in building a peaceful and united community. When we forgive each other, we not only help resolve conflicts, but also create conditions for love and understanding to grow. Forgiveness is how we free ourselves from negative feelings and hatred, paving the way for reconciliation and the reconstruction of relationships. Jesus gave a perfect example of forgiveness when he was crucified on the cross. Even though he was suffering and being treated cruelly, he still prayed, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing." Luke 23:34. This is a wonderful demonstration of unconditional forgiveness and a model for all of us. In short, forgiveness according to God's teachings is not just a simple action, but a profound and important part of our spiritual life. Forgiveness helps us live in harmony with each other, free from the burdens of resentment, and closer to God's unconditional love. It is the path to peace and unity, and reflects the love and compassion that Jesus taught and practiced during his life. Finding significant items. Jesus' teachings on love were a central theme in his teachings and had a profound influence on Christian faith. Jesus not only conveyed the value of love through words, but also expressed it through his actions, making love the foundation of all relationships between people and with God. One of the outstanding teachings about love appears in the Gospel according to St. John. "Love one another as I have loved you." John 15:12. This is a powerful call to live according to Jesus' example of love. He not only loved those around him with words, but also with actions, showing love through sacrifice and service. Jesus loved unconditionally and forgave his enemies, which is not only a lesson in love, but also an example for those who want to follow him. The love that Jesus teaches is not just love for friends, but also includes those we may find difficult to love. In the parable of the Good Samaritan, Luke 10:25-37, Jesus told the story of a Samaritan who helped an injured Jew, even though the Jew may have considered Samaritan an enemy. Through this story, God emphasizes that love has no limits of race, country, or any boundaries. Love must be extended to everyone, especially those in need of help and sympathy. Jesus also taught that love is a fulfillment of the law and the prophets. When asked about the greatest law, he replied, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind, and you shall love your neighbor as yourself." Matthew 22:37-39. These are the two greatest commandments from which all the law and prophets come. Love for God and love for others are inseparable. They are two sides of the same coin. The love that Jesus taught is not just a feeling or an abstract idea, but a concrete and real action. He showed us that true love is sacrificial love, willing to put the interests of others above personal interests. In the Sermon on the Mount, the Lord taught that we should love our enemies and pray for those who persecute us. Matthew 5:44. This reflects a strong and powerful love that overcomes all barriers of hatred and discrimination. Timely communications. Jesus' teachings on forgiveness are an important part of his message, deeply reflecting God's mercy and love. Forgiveness is not just an action, but an attitude, an indispensable part of the spiritual life of Christians. Jesus not only taught forgiveness through words, but also demonstrated it through his life and death. One of Jesus' outstanding teachings on forgiveness was in the Sermon on the Mount when he emphasized, "If you forgive others when they trespass against you, your Father in heaven will also forgive you." Matthew 6:14. This shows that forgiveness is not only a request, but also a condition for receiving forgiveness from God. Jesus emphasized that forgiveness must begin within the person and directly affect our relationship with God. Jesus not only taught but also practiced forgiveness clearly and powerfully. While being crucified on the cross, he prayed, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." Luke 23:34. This is a great example of love and kindness. He not only forgave those who caused him suffering, but also prayed for them, demonstrating that his forgiveness was not limited by personal pain. In the parable of the prodigal son, Luke 15:11-32, Jesus told a story that illustrates God's forgiveness and love. In this story, the father represents God who forgave and welcomed his son back, even though he had squandered his property and lived a sinful life. A father's forgiveness is not only about accepting his child again, but also about blessing and celebrating. Through this story, Jesus shows that God's forgiveness is boundless and unconditional. Forgiveness is also an essential part of community life and personal relationships. Jesus teaches that holding grudges and not forgiving can cause division and suffering. In the story of the unforgiving servant, Matthew 18:21-35, he emphasized that unforgiveness leads to punishment, reflecting that we need to treat others the same way. The tolerance we wish to receive from God. Compelling urge to help. Humility is not only a moral virtue, but also an essential requirement for living an authentic Christian life. Jesus taught that humility is how we demonstrate our faith in God and accept his guidance in daily life. In the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus emphasized the importance of humility by declaring that blessed are the humble, for they will inherit the promised land. Matthew 5:5. Through this verse, he shows that humility is not only a virtue, but also a path to eternal blessings and happiness. Humility, according to Jesus, is the ability to correctly perceive oneself, not only in terms of personal abilities and achievements, but also in terms of dependence on God's grace and love. Jesus frequently criticized the Pharisees and religious leaders for their lack of humility and often demonstrated arrogance in their behavior. In the parable of the Pharisee and the tax collector, Luke 18-9:14, he describes a Pharisee who stood praying, proud of his righteousness, and contemptuous of the tax collector. On the contrary, the tax collector could only bow his head and pray, "God, have mercy on me, because I am a sinner." Jesus believed that the tax collector, even though he was despised by society, was accepted by God because of his humility and repentance. This illustrates that humility and sincerity in asking for grace are what Jesus values more than boasting about personal merits. In addition, Jesus also used the parable about choosing a seat at the banquet, Luke 14-7:11, to teach about humility. He advised that when attending a banquet, we should choose a more modest seat, and if we are invited to a higher seat, it is an honor from the host. Humility in choosing a seat is not only an expression of humility, but also a way for God to honor us. Through this parable, Jesus shows that humility is a way to show trust in God's arrangements and decisions. Finally, Jesus demonstrated great humility in his own life and service. He washed the feet of his disciples at the Last Supper, an act of servanthood, and explained that whoever wants to be first must be last of all and servant of all. Matthew 20:26-27. Through this action, he showed that service and humility are ways of expressing God's love and service to humanity. Natural world phenomena. Jesus' teaching about loving your enemies is one of the most profound and challenging lessons in his teachings. In the Bible, especially in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus set a new and lofty standard for love and how we should treat those around us, especially those who are not close or even oppose us. Jesus taught that loving one's enemies is not only an act of compassion, but also a way to demonstrate the difference in Christian faith compared to society's conventional concepts. In the Gospel of Matthew, Jesus said, "You have heard that it was said, 'Love those who love you and hate your enemies.' But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you." Matthew 5:43-44. Through these words, Jesus set a new standard of love that is not limited to good relationships, but also extends to those we dislike or even feel hurt by. Surname. The reason Jesus gave this teaching is to encourage us to rise above our natural human reactions, which tend to be retaliatory or aggressive when offended or hurt. Jesus calls us to act with love and mercy, not just as an emotional response, but as a conscious choice. This is evident in his parable of the Good Samaritan, Luke 10:25-37, in which Jesus describes how a Samaritan, often looked down upon by the Jews, helped a Jew in need. The robber beat and injured him, even though this person was not his compatriot. Through this story, Jesus illustrates that mercy and love do not discriminate by race, social status, or nationality. It is a necessary response for everyone. Love for enemies also demonstrates learning from the example of Jesus, who loved and forgave those who tortured and crucified him on the cross. On the cross, Jesus prayed, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they do." Luke 23:34. This is a powerful demonstration of loving and forgiving, even in the face of the greatest ostracism and pain. Loving our enemies is not easy, but it is a challenge for us to develop faith and love the way Jesus taught. It asks us to overcome our egos, put aside our hatred and hurt, and choose forgiveness and love. Through this, we not only reflect God's nature, but also contribute to building a more peaceful and loving world. Unexpected physical healing. One of the important points that Jesus taught was the combination of faith and action. He encouraged believers not only to believe in Him with their mouths, but also to practice what He taught in daily life. This is shown through many parables and teachings of God. For example, in the parable of the rich man and Lazarus, Luke 16:19-31, Jesus shows that discrimination and care for the poor is not only a moral act, but also an essential part. Weakness of living by faith. Jesus also taught that faith is inseparable from love and justice. In the Gospel of Matthew, He emphasized, "Love your neighbor as yourself." Matthew 22:39. This is not only a moral principle, but also a concrete guide to how we should behave in our daily relationships. The love that Jesus speaks of is not a mere emotion, but a conscious and ongoing choice that includes being helpful, understanding, and fair to all. Furthermore, Jesus encourages believers to live a full and rich life by seeking righteousness and caring for those who are abandoned in society. In the Sermon on the Mount, He spoke about the Beatitudes, Matthew 5:3-12, and affirmed that those who live according to these virtues will receive God's blessing. These Beatitudes include poverty of spirit, meekness, and the desire for justice, all of which are important elements in the practice of faith and love. Jesus also emphasized that the practice of faith must come from a sincere heart and not be deceived. In the Gospel of Matthew, He criticized those who only performed external religious rituals without sincerity and sincerity. Jesus asks believers not just to follow the rules, but to have a real inner and spiritual change. In short, Jesus' teachings on the practice of faith and love are a noble calling for all believers. He calls us not only to talk about faith, but also to demonstrate faith through concrete actions in daily life. The combination of faith and action not only reflects God's loving and just nature, but also contributes to building a more peaceful and loving community. Restoration of broken relationships. In the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus declared that blessed are the peacemakers, for they will be called children of God. Matthew 5-9. This is one of the Beatitudes, and it reflects the nobility of pursuing peace in life. Jesus not only encourages but also requires believers to strive to create peace, starting with personal relationships and extending to the larger community. This means that seeking peace is not only a good deed, but also an essential part of living according to God's instructions. In many of His stories, Jesus taught about the importance of reconciliation and forgiveness. A good example is the parable of the unmerciful slave, Matthew 18:23-35, where He emphasizes that those who have been forgiven by God must also be willing to forgive others. Jesus shows that holding grudges and not forgiving creates division and conflict, which is contrary to the goal of building peace and unity. Jesus also taught that the pursuit of peace includes treating others fairly and respecting the rights of others. He called on believers to focus not only on personal gain, but also on justice in relationships and society. In the Gospel of Luke, He spoke about helping the poor and vulnerable, and emphasized that these actions not only create peace, but also demonstrate God's mercy and love. Luke 14:13-14. An important part of pursuing peace according to the teachings of Jesus is the ability to face and resolve conflict peacefully. He taught that when there are conflicts or contradictions, believers should seek to resolve them by listening, dialogue, and searching for just solutions. This demonstrates maturity in faith and a commitment to building better relationships with others. Through these teachings, He emphasized that to live a fulfilling and meaningful life, we need to be faithful to God and practice spiritual principles in all our actions. Jesus encourages us not only to seek material values, but also to put God first, love and help those around us, and live according to the truth. Faithfulness to God requires sacrifice and commitment, but this is the path to a life filled with meaning and true happiness. His teachings are not only spiritual advice, but also specific instructions, helping us live according to eternal values and achieve peace and happiness in life.